Have you ever stopped to think about how sometimes the biggest revolutions come dressed in anonymity? In Las Vegas, a city where luxury shines brighter than reason, where every glance hides a move and every gesture could cost millions, a figure emerged that no one expected. The room was full of sharks, champions, sponsors, poker influencers, big shots, famous faces, all swagger. And then he shows up, a man with a simple stance, discreet clothes, and a technical access badge still swinging in his pocket. He was the janitor. Yep, a janitor, the kind you'd wave at without even really looking. But he wasn't there to clean up anything, at least not the floor. He was there to mess up the game. The main table looked like a gladiator arena. Legendary. Names were in the mix. His entrance was met with interrupted stares, ironic smiles, and that type of whispered comment only the arrogant know how to make. No one knew who the guy was. No background, no sponsor, no digital presence. The crowd looked at him like he was a glitch in the system, like, who let this guy in? But he sat down, calmly, didn't ask for permission. Just stared at the cards, the players, and the silence. And if there's one thing silence does well, it's make the arrogant way too comfortable. What no one knew, yet, was that this man carried an invisible math in his eyes. He didn't need fame, nor an expensive suit. All he needed was time. The same time he used to watch, to study, to memorize patterns, to map out minds. And there, right in front of the cameras, he would begin to dismantle, piece by piece, an empire of vanity. Like each chip he pushed onto the table was actually a verdict. And that's how, almost like a bad joke to the others, the game started to turn. And man, it started turning beautifully. But here's where things really start to get weird. The disappearance, curiously, didn't have sirens, posters, or police bulletins. It was a disappearance more cruel, more symbolic, almost poetic, if you can say that. Little by little, one by one, the biggest names in world poker started leaving the tournament with their heads down, defeated by a man who, until then, was just part of the furniture in that environment. The janitor. The same guy no one greeted. In the hotel lobby, who passed unnoticed through the casino hallways, like a ghost with a maintenance key hanging from his belt. What really disappeared was the reputation of the giants, the legends, the champions, the media darlings. Suddenly they all started to look fragile, too human. And since the internet never forgives the unexpected, the uproar on social media was immediate. Short clips went viral, showing shock on their faces, hands trembling, fake smiles after humiliating defeats. The specialized forums were on fire. Hashtags were popping up. Mysterious janitor, the anonymous Allen, clean poker. But behind the virtual outcry, there was one question that just wouldn't go away. Who is this man? And more importantly, where did he come from? Because no one just shows up at a high-level tournament and destroys the best without a past, or without a plan. The public wanted answers, the media wanted a story, and the players, well, they wanted revenge, or at least a good alibi for the embarrassment. It was in this uneasy atmosphere that a news team decided to go beyond the tables and microphones. They decided to go to where the story started. The simple life of the man who was tearing down myths. The first stop was a small town in rural Texas, almost forgotten on the maps, where the janitor had worked for years at a small community college. There, among old frames, scratched desks, and teachers with tired expressions, they found the first signs of his true nature. A librarian revealed, with a certain sparkle in her eyes, that he was a constant visitor to the math and human behavior section. He read like someone eating, voracious, silent, no fuss, she said. He always picked books on statistics, logic, game theory, and also some detective novels. I think he liked hidden patterns. Then came childhood friends, co-workers. An old janitor told them that the two used to spend hours in the cafeteria playing poker with makeshift cards. He never laughed when he won. He just stared, like someone who already knew the end of the story before it even began. A former supervisor, on the other hand, shared that the janitor had been invited years ago to participate in a local amateur tournament, but he declined. He said it wasn't the time yet. I thought it was just insecurity. But now, seeing all this, maybe he was just waiting for the right moment. And then the pieces started to fall into place. This man wasn't just some lucky guy. He was a plan with legs. It's funny how the world needs badges to recognize talent. If you don't have followers, an award-winning resume, or spotlights pointed at your forehead, people rarely take you seriously. But in that moment, with the consistency with which the janitor was eliminating each opponent, the realization hit. And it wasn't just the poker chips falling. It was the perception chip. That old human habit of judging people's worth by the surface, by appearances, by what's shown. But real talent, my friend, real talent usually grows in the dark, and it thrives in silence. It's like coal that, under pressure and patience, turns into diamond and shines without needing applause. In interviews, the janitor's family seemed both surprised and proud. "He's always been different," his sister said, her voice trembling with emotion. Quiet, focused, one of those who doesn't get involved in the drama but watches everything. "I saw him taking notes, studying stats, but I thought it was just a hobby, that he was trying to distract himself from a tough life." A cousin reminisced about card games during Christmas parties. "He'd let us win. I think it was more of a test to see how we'd react. Too slick, must be." The stories, all full of affection and surprise, painted a picture of a man no one really knew completely, not even those closest to him. Meanwhile, in the professional world, the mood was one of disbelief. Some insisted it was all just coincidence. Others claimed he must have been using some hidden tech. Then there were the more paranoid ones who swore he was part of a big setup, maybe a secret AI experiment with a human appearance. Yes, this was actually suggested in a forum. But deep down, everyone knew, no one wins that many times just by luck. There was method, there was coldness, and above all, there was something the others didn't have, the element of surprise. This kind of psychological impact is powerful. After all, when you prepare to face a master and lose, you accept it. But when you lose to someone you didn't even know was playing, that hurts your pride. It destroys your ego. And here's the irony. The disappearance of the ego of the greats was, in fact, the appearance of the real talent of someone no one saw coming. And the further he went in the tournament, the more people wanted to know, what's this guy's secret? Why all this preparation in silence? And if he was just getting started? It was there, in a move that lasted less than 30 seconds, that the world seemed to stop. A typical all-in move, like so many others you see in televised poker tournaments. But this one was different. The janitor, who until then had been eliminating opponents with subtle moves, decided to stack all his chips in one dry, direct, unexpected move. On the other side of the table, one of the world champions, known for his impenetrable game and for never yielding to pressure, hesitated. And when a shark hesitates, it's because it smells something bigger than blood. It was fear, and it wasn't unfounded. The play was broadcast live, and the commentators, initially skeptical, even mocking, suddenly went silent, staring at the monitors like they had just seen a glitch in the Matrix. This wasn't random. This was pure calculation. The winning hand was just the surface. What really blew minds was the reading of the situation, the coldness, the choice of the exact moment. One commentator, known for his almost arrogant skepticism, called it the cleanest, most calculated all-in of the last 10 years. And when he said that, no one laughed. On the contrary, they started reviewing the Janitor's previous moves, frame by frame, as if they were trying to decode a hidden code. And that's when the first clue came. A pattern. He didn't play on impulse. He didn't react. He anticipated. Like a chess player who's already seen 5 moves ahead, he put his opponents in situations where any decision they made would lead to their defeat. It was almost cruel, almost genius. But the internet is fast, and truth hunters are quicker. Within hours, someone found an old video buried in the darkest corner of YouTube with fewer than 200 views. In it, the same man, visibly younger but with the same calm look, won a regional tournament in a smoky bar in Reno. The footage was shaky, the sound was poor, but the content, my friend, the content was gold. There he was, defeating other players with the same precision, the same lack of expression, the same steady hands. The date of the video? 8 years ago. The question then stopped being, who is he? And became, why did he wait so long? This discovery set the backstage of the tournament on fire. It was as if someone had revealed that the extra in a movie was actually the director. What had been thought to be luck now gained the shape of long-term strategy. And at this point in the story, it's important to remember something few realize. The true genius doesn't care about the stage. He cares about the symphony. The janitor didn't want fame. He wanted the right moment. And when that moment came, he was more than prepared. He was lethal. Speculations began popping up everywhere. Some said he was a retired spy trained in behavioral reading. Others swore he was the illegitimate son of one of the great poker masters, hidden from the world to avoid scandals. The theories ranged from absurd to almost plausible. But what they all had in common was the admission of an uncomfortable truth. He wasn't a beginner. He was, at the very least, a scholar, and at most, a hidden master. It was in this whirlwind of twists that the public started to split. Part of the audience began idolizing him as an anti-hero, the one who represents all the invisible talents of the world, all the ordinary people underestimated by appearances. The other part saw him with suspicion, as if he were a threat to the established order. But amidst the controversy, one silent truth imposed itself. He knew what he was doing, and he wasn't there by chance. Body language experts began reviewing his facial expressions. In every move, he maintained the same neutral look, as if he had switched off his emotions, something even the most experienced professionals struggled to master. Behavioral psychologists entered the scene, trying to decipher what made this man so unshakable. And patterns started to emerge. He didn't blink at critical moments. He kept his hands always at the same distance from his chest. He used short phrases, sometimes didn't speak at all. It was clear, everything about him was control, and control, in poker, is a weapon few know how to handle. It's what separates impulsive players from strategists. It's what turns a bad hand into a win. And he, by all indications, had mastered this art with mastery. But what impressed the most wasn't the technical skill. It was the fact that no one had noticed before. How had someone so prepared stayed on the sidelines for so long? Amateur videos, old testimonials, records of small competitions he had quietly participated in started popping up. Always winning, always leaving the scene right after. As if he'd been training, as if he'd been testing hypotheses, as if his whole life had been a simulation for that moment. This completely changed public perception. Suddenly, the eccentric, lucky guy turned into the invisible genius. And so, the narrative that once was one of amazement turned into reverence. The world of poker, competitive, vain, and addicted to status, was forced to swallow the fact that a man with no famous last name, no sponsorship, no official resume, had just redefined the rules of the game. And all of this with one all-in, one single move, that now we know was anything but an impulse. But while everyone searched for answers, one question still hung in the air like cigarette smoke in a casino. If he wasn't an amateur, why did he decide to play now? Why this tournament, this table, this moment? And what else was behind the serene expression of that man who, without saying much, was forcing the whole world to rethink the meaning of genius? The moment the world's eyes turned to him, what was once just an exotic participant in a tournament became a living puzzle. What began as curiosity quickly transformed into obsession. Amateur investigators, investigative journalists, click-hungry streamers, all dove into the mission of uncovering the identity of the janitor who was rewriting the history of live poker. It was as if everyone had woken up to a silent conspiracy. How could someone with no competitive resume, no known name, and not even an official online profile make the world's top players look like schoolboys? The first thread pulled came from a sports journalist who, curious about the janitor's coldness in his plays, decided to investigate his professional background. And that's when everything started to make sense. Old records showed that he had worked for over 15 years behind the scenes of casinos spread across Nevada, Louisiana, and Atlantic City. Not as a player, but as a janitor, security, maintenance tech, camera operator. Always in peripheral roles, almost invisible, and always close to the poker tables. He was literally a shadow in the game's backstage, and there, in the dark, he learned more than any course could teach. Stories started to surface from former co-workers who until then had never associated the guy from the night shift with the man now shining in the spotlight. He was the type to arrive before everyone else and leave after the lights went out, always with a little notebook, writing things down but never saying what it was. "We thought he was just methodical, or a little weird," said a maintenance manager from a casino in New Orleans. But now those notes were taking on a new meaning. What had seemed quirky was, in fact, a systematic collection of data. For years, he silently observed the best players in the world, the mannerisms, the patterns, the bluffs, the mistakes, and he recorded it all. One of the most revealing testimonies came from a retired dealer who had worked with him for almost a decade. She shared that during slow hours, he would sit at an empty table and simulate plays, alone. He'd play from all sides of the table, creating scenarios, testing decisions, practicing reactions. It was like watching a pianist rehearsing without an audience. He didn't need real opponents. He already knew each profile, each type of player. It was almost scary how detailed his simulations were. When asked why he did that, he'd respond with a discreet smile. "One day this will make sense." And it did. Another curious detail and one that added even more depth to the story, was the discovery that he had declined at least 3 previous invitations to semi-professional tournaments. That's right. Over the past 5 years, he had been invited to compete. Some organizers reported that he was recommended by lesser-known players who had seen him perform in informal games and recognized his talent. But he always declined with the same reasoning: it's not time yet. What seemed like fear or insecurity began to be understood as discipline. He was waiting for something, a sign, a personal reason. And as will be revealed later, that reason had a name and a history full of emotion. Investigations also revealed that he was an avid scholar. At home, he accumulated books on game theory, human behavior psychology, body language, and war strategies. Classics like The Inner Game of Tennis by Timothy Galway, The Art of War by Sun Tzu, The Drunkard's Walk by Leonard Mlodinow, in addition to specific works on poker, such as Super System by Doyle Brunson and The Theory of Poker by David Sklansky. But he didn't just read, he applied. In his routine, he created simulations, recorded probabilities, compared different player styles. It was as if he was building an invisible arsenal, a true organic artificial intelligence driven by discipline and patience. The most impressive thing, however, came from an interview with a psychologist specializing in decision-making under stress. Analyzing the tournament footage, the professional stated that he had never seen such emotional consistency under pressure. He doesn't react to victories, doesn't react to losses. He doesn't seek validation. That's rare. Most players look for some kind of external stimulus, a smile, a glance, a gesture of intimidation. He doesn't. He plays against himself. That makes him dangerous because it makes him impossible to read. The psychologist even compared him to trained spies from the old KGB, who learned to control even the dilation of their pupils to hide their emotions. This revelation changed the game off the table. The press stopped treating him as a passing phenomenon and began seeing him as one of the greatest enigmas in poker history. TV programs started dedicating entire segments to analyzing him. Documentaries in production were fighting for the rights to tell his story. But he remained silent. No interviews, no public appearances outside the tournament, no social media. He continued to be exactly what he had always been, a man of discreet physical presence and profound emotional impact. And the more the mystery grew, the more the idea solidified that his participation in that tournament wasn't by chance. It was a mission. A carefully planned mission with clear objectives that went beyond the victory itself. After all, anyone who waits over a decade to reveal themselves in a live broadcasted championship has a very strong reason, and the questions began to shift. It was no longer who is he, but what does he want? Because no one does all of this just for money, especially someone who, by all indications, was already rich, intellectually, emotionally, and maybe even financially. And if that tournament was just the means, what if what he was doing was much bigger than winning a competition? Maybe he was trying to prove something. Maybe he was paying off a promise. Maybe he was laying the groundwork for something the world wasn't ready to understand yet. But before any theory could be confirmed, a new layer of suspense formed in the air. He started crossing paths with key figures in poker, and the atmosphere at the table would change drastically. As the rounds went on, the atmosphere around the table was no longer just one of anticipation. It was a mix of reverence and a hint of fear. Something had changed. The players, used to being the center of attention, now looked at the janitor with a hesitation you wouldn't even see at the final tables of world championships. It wasn't just about losing chips. It was about being read, dismantled, emotionally exposed in front of the cameras. And for many of them, that was worse than losing. The way he remained still, eyes fixed on his opponents, began to provoke something rare among professionals: discomfort. That serenity was destabilizing. He didn't speak. He didn't bluff. He showed nothing. And paradoxically, that said everything. First of all, shared similar stories. One described feeling like he was being scanned by an algorithm. Another recalled that, in a moment of doubt, he looked away and was certain the janitor already knew what he would do. The most impactful, however, came from a former world champion who gave an explosive interview to a streaming channel during a break in the tournament. He said, "This guy, he's not playing poker, he's deciphering people. I've never felt so naked at a table." When the interviewer laughed, thinking it was a metaphor, he added, "I'm serious. I think he's memorized bluff patterns, micro-expressions, pupil dilation, finger movements, everything. And the worst part? He acts like it's no big deal, like it's natural for him." This statement became fuel for a new theory that started circulating behind the scenes. The janitor must have been trained by someone. And not just anyone. They were talking about a legendary retired player who had disappeared from the circuit more than a decade ago. A name that, out of respect or fear, was rarely spoken aloud. They said this man lived secluded in a cabin in the mountains, far from civilization, and only accepted to train those who were worthy. A kind of poker sensei, known for his almost superhuman ability to read human behavior. Nothing was confirmed, of course. But the mere hypothesis was enough to make the spotlight shine even more intensely on the janitor. After all, what if all of this was part of a plan? What if he wasn't just playing, but executing a mission? As suspicions grew, his behavior remained unchanged. Cold as steel, serene as a monk in meditation. But behind this seemingly impassive exterior, small cracks began to appear. At one point, between hands, he looked for a few seconds at an empty chair in the audience. Just that. A brief glance, almost imperceptible. But to those watching closely, it seemed significant. As if that chair held some emotional weight. A void that somehow moved the entire invisible machinery behind his actions. Some say he whispered something. Others swear it was just the wind. But the fact is, this solitary gesture added more fuel to the fire of mystery. As the competition narrowed and the big names fell, the tournament felt less like a game and more like a stage for a reckoning. A duel between a system built on fame and appearance and a man whose only credential was silence. And the remaining players? Well, they began to change their strategy. They stopped trying to outwit him. They started defending themselves, trying to survive. It was like playing against a ghost, or worse, against someone who already knew the end of the story. And so, with each elimination, more players gave their testimonies. Some filled with admiration, others with resentment. But they all had one thing in common. No one left unscathed after a confrontation with the janitor. Because his game wasn't with the cards, it was with the people. And when someone plays with souls, there are always consequences. When the lights of the final table seemed more intense, it wasn't just because of the flawless live broadcast production. It was the atmosphere. Dense. Heavy. The audience was no longer watching out of curiosity, but out of reverence. Something bigger than the game was unfolding. And the janitor, sitting, calm as ever. But now there was a different weight in the air around him. A weight coming from crossed glances, long silences, and most importantly, from the truth about to emerge. A truth that doesn't reveal itself with fanfare, but with a whisper. It was when one of the commentators made an observation that cut like a knife. He's not here just for the money. This smells like an old promise, and like every good story needs a soulful reason, it came. It appeared discreetly through a reporter who managed to speak with an elderly woman in rural Arizona, the janitor's aunt. According to her, he had promised his father, before his death, that one day he would show the world that silent genius also has value. His father, a poker enthusiast who never had the chance to play professionally, died without seeing his son shine, but he left behind a lesson. You don't need a stage to prove who you are. You just need the right moment. And that tournament, seemingly trivial to many, was the stage for that promise. There was no audience large enough for what was at stake. This revelation changed everything. The audience, already fascinated, was now emotionally invested. Every chip pushed forward carried memories, loyalty, and grief. It was more than a competition. It was redemption. And when the remaining players realized this, the atmosphere at the table became even more intense. The taunts began. One of the opponents, visibly disturbed by the janitor's almost impenetrable aura, muttered quietly, "You're playing for memories, huh? Be careful, that messes with logic." To which he simply lifted his gaze and replied, "For the first time in hours. When memory is more precise than emotion, it becomes calculation." It was the most impactful sentence said throughout the tournament. The commentators went silent. The opponent, visibly unsettled, fell in the next round. These verbal confrontations, however subtle, exposed the protagonist's true power. He didn't need to raise his voice or act like a genius. His authority came from the consistency between intent and action. While others used bluffs, he used the truth as a weapon, and that confused them. Players accustomed to manipulating and hiding began to feel exposed. Because what do you do against someone who doesn't lie? Someone who plays fair but reads you like a pocketbook? It's like fighting a monk in boxing who knows exactly when and where you're going to miss the punch. As the tournament moved toward its climax, the narrative shifted from underdogs versus giants. It was now about an ordinary man showing that genius doesn't need permission, that wisdom acquired in silence has more power than arrogance wrapped in applause. The remaining opponents tried to provoke him, test his patience, get a reaction out of him. And all they got were a slight eyebrow raise, a slow breath, a light touch on the cards. He didn't fall for traps, because he was the trap itself, the entire time. And when he revealed, in another rare moment of speech, that he had played the same decisive move against his own father years ago, in an informal game, everyone understood what he meant. Every move carried history. It wasn't just mathematics, it was memory and intention, and in that rare mix lay his strength. Playing with coldness is hard. Playing with feeling is even harder. But mastering both? That's what separates mortals from legends. And it is in this sacred ground, where emotion and logic meet, that the game prepares for its defining moment. The final table felt like a silent battlefield. The lights, once vibrant, now seemed more sober, as if they knew the gravity of the moment. 3 players remained: a charismatic professional, a well-known figure to the public, a technical, cerebral female player, famous for never losing control. And of course, the man who was no longer called the janitor, but the enigma. There, at the center of the contained chaos, his face remained unchanged. Hands crossed, gaze fixed, as if he were about to make a move not just in the game, but in the very history of the sport. It was the stillness before the thunder. The first hands of the final were marked by tension and restraint. No one wanted to be the first to fall. Each bet seemed to weigh tons. The female player analyzed everything with cold precision. The other opponent tried to destabilize with jokes, sarcastic comments, challenging stares. But in the face of the enigma, everything returned to the same place. Silence. He observed. He waited, mentally noting every eye twitch, every hesitation in the touch of the chips. And then the unexpected happened. He smiled. A discreet, brief smile, but enough to silence the entire room. It was the signal. Something was coming. In the next round, with the cards still hidden, he pushed all his chips into the center. A dry, cold all-in. No words. It was as if he had thrown a grenade onto the table. The cameras immediately focused on the faces of the opponents. The commentator whispered, "He did it. Bet it all." The silence was so thick you could hear the dealer's heartbeat. The charismatic player's eyes widened. The female player frowned. No one expected that. Not at that moment. It was too soon, too risky, too bold. But coming from him, it felt inevitable. And then began the game within the game. The opponent tried to read his facial expressions. The female player tried to calculate probabilities. The cameras danced between faces, as if each expression could offer a clue. But the enigma remained motionless, like a painting, like a statue sculpted with surgical calm. One hand on his chin, the other on the table, eyes fixed on the horizon. This wasn't bluffing, or if it was the most elegant bluff in history. The kind that doesn't seek to deceive, but to expose the fragility of others in the face of certainty. After minutes of indecision, the first to fold was the charismatic player. He gave up, muttered something like, "Not worth the risk." The female player hesitated longer. She sweated. She looked at him. She looked at her cards. She knew that if she accepted and lost, it would be over. But there was something in his gaze, something that didn't beg, didn't seduce, didn't threaten. It was a clean, transparent look. And curiously, that scared her more than any sweaty bluff. She pulled back, tossed her cards aside. The all-in-one without a card being revealed. The room exploded in applause. He simply collected the chips serenely, as if he'd known from the start. From there on, the game turned into a parade. One by one, the remaining opponents were eliminated with the same precision. The enigma didn't use tricks, didn't drop catchphrases, didn't need to. Every move was a lesson, every victory, a poem. Until, in the end, only he remained. Champion. Absolute. The man who started the tournament, seen as an eccentric amateur, ended up hailed as a living legend. And even with the eyes of the world on him, he didn't climb the stage, didn't raise the trophy, didn't shout victory. He simply took the badge from his pocket, that old janitor badge, and left it on the table before walking out, unhurried, as if he already knew that one chapter was ending and another was beginning. The media went wild. Social media fell into a trance. The live broadcast broke global audience records, but he disappeared into the casino corridors. No interviews, no speeches. He just got in the elevator, pressed the button for the ground floor, and left. As if his mission had been accomplished. And there was silence. One of those silences that doesn't disturb, but reverberates. One of those silences that tells a story louder than any shouts of euphoria. A silence that announced that the world of poker would never be the same. Because now, everyone knew that, among the anonymous in the world, there are geniuses who only need one single chance, one single all-in. When his name appeared officially on the champions board, no one knew exactly how to react. The award ceremony was set for late afternoon, but he disappeared. The organizers searched through every corridor of the casino, on the cameras, in the hotel floors, in the parking lot. Nothing. The champion simply vanished. And for the first time in the history of the tournament, the trophy was placed on the table without the presence of the winner, a detail that turned the victory into a legend. What was already extraordinary became modern folklore. It was as if he were silently saying, "I didn't come for the trophy. I came for justice." And what justice was that? The justice of underestimated competence. The justice of the ignored unknown. The justice of talent that grows in the shadows, while the world applauds noise. His presence in that tournament exposed, without the need for scandal, the deeply rooted prejudice in the world of poker, and in society as a whole, the idea that genius must come with a title, marketing, or an important surname. He broke that logic, tore up the script. He showed that what truly matters is silent building, studying without an audience, the patience that stretches for years until the right moment. And for many, that was a lesson. For others, a punch to the gut. The media, initially obsessed with discovering the who, began to focus on the how. Entire articles were dedicated to analyzing his style of play, his philosophy, the way he used time to his advantage. Experts gave in. It was impossible to deny the man's genius. But what caught everyone's attention the most was the cultural impact of the victory. New players began to feel represented. Ordinary people, without sponsorships or spotlights, saw in him a kind of prophecy fulfilled, a paradigm shift. It was as if he had opened the door for a new generation, as if he were saying, "You don't need to be famous to be good. You just need to be ready." Even the harshest critics eventually succumbed. Some who had previously called it luck or chance started publishing articles praising the brutal elegance of his style. And the organizers, pressured by a wave of supporters, decided to honor him in a unique way. They renamed an entire room in the casino to All-In Room in honor of the anonymous master. A plaque was installed with a quote he said at the final table: "Who knows what they're doing doesn't need to shout." And it was in that gesture, simple yet symbolic, that justice was sealed. But the most intriguing thing of all was the refusal. He didn't show up to collect any prizes, didn't give interviews, didn't accept any invitations to shows. When they tried to trace the hotel where he had stayed, they found out he had used a fake name. Everything had been meticulously planned to ensure his disappearance after the victory. As if the gesture spoke louder than his presence. As if the true prize was having proven to the world and to himself that talent doesn't ask for permission. It arrives, it enters, and it changes everything. The end didn't come with fireworks. It came with slow steps on the sidewalk. Security cameras days later captured the image of a man wearing a cap, a backpack, walking down a dimly lit street on the outskirts of Las Vegas. It was him. The champion without a trophy, the hero without a stage. He walked unhurried, as if He no longer carried the weight of proving anything to anyone. There was no crowd around him, no flashes, no interviews. Just him, the pavement, and the silence. The same stillness that had accompanied him at the final table now surrounded him again. It was anonymity, reconnecting with the person who never really wanted to leave it. While the world of poker still debated the technical implications of his victory between forums, videos, and articles, something more powerful began to emerge. A story. A story that transcended the game. That became a living metaphor for everyone who had ever felt small, invisible, or doubted. He was, unknowingly, the representation of thousands of talents buried under hasty judgments. The personification of silent persistence. The kind of genius that doesn't need to raise its voice. It just needs the right moment. And the question that lingered in the air, echoing in poker tables, discussion groups, and in the hearts of those who witnessed it all was, how many geniuses are still living in anonymity? How many people right now are sweeping hallways, serving coffee, waiting for buses, carrying brilliant strategies inside them, ideas that could change everything, talents that the world hasn't recognized yet? Perhaps this is the greatest lesson the janitor left. Not about the game, but about life. About never underestimating silence, never disregarding simplicity, and most importantly, never ever ignoring someone just because they haven't shined yet.